At first, the diver thought the shape beneath the water was just another rock formation. The lake was dark that morning. Sunlight barely reached the freezing depths below Lake Titicaca while cold currents moved silently around him. Then his flashlight passed across the stone again. Straight edges. Sharp corners. Cut blocks. He stopped swimming. The shape was too precise to be natural. As he moved closer, more forms slowly emerged beneath layers of algae and sediment, terraces, carved walls, stone platforms, and what looked like the remains of an ancient ceremonial structure hidden underwater for centuries. Then the diver noticed something else. Stairs. Stone steps descending deeper into the darkness beneath the lake floor. Later, archaeologists confirmed the discovery was real. Ancient ruins existed beneath Lake Titicaca. And suddenly, one of South America's oldest legends no longer sounded impossible. Because for generations, the Inca civilization believed this lake was the birthplace of civilization itself. According to their stories, after a great darkness covered the earth, the creator god Viracocha emerged from these waters and brought light back into the world. From the lake came the sun, the moon, the stars, and the first humans. At first, modern travelers usually hear that story and assume it is simply mythology created to explain nature. Then they arrive there themselves. The lake sits high in the Andes Mountains between Peru and Bolivia, surrounded by enormous skies and distant peaks that seem suspended above the clouds. During sunrise, mist drifts slowly across the water while golden light spreads across the lake so gradually that the horizon nearly disappears completely. Water blends into sky. Mountains reflect perfectly across the surface. And for a moment, the world no longer feels ordinary. Even today, travelers describe Lake Titicaca differently from almost every other place they visit. Not frightening. Not haunted. Just impossibly ancient. And perhaps the strangest part is this. The deeper archaeologists explore beneath the lake, the more the old legends seem connected to something real. Thousands of years ago, ancient people standing beside Lake Titicaca saw something difficult to explain. A world above the clouds. At more than 12,000 feet above sea level, the lake feels separated from ordinary life entirely. The air is thinner. Light behaves differently. Sound carries strangely across the water. During early mornings, cold mist drifts slowly between mountains while sunlight spreads across the lake in silver and gold reflections so perfectly still that the sky and water begin blending together. One traveler later described waking before sunrise beside the lake and watching the mountains slowly emerge through the fog one by one. He admitted there were moments when the reflections became so perfect he could no longer distinguish the horizon at all. Another visitor explained that the silence there felt emotionally overwhelming because there were no city sounds, no engines, no distractions, only wind, water, and enormous skies stretching endlessly into the distance. And this is exactly what ancient civilizations experienced too. Long before astronomy or geology existed, human beings explained emotionally powerful places through stories. Mountains became sacred. Caves became gateways to spiritual worlds. And landscapes that felt larger than ordinary life became connected to creation itself. Lake Titicaca was one of those places. According to Inca tradition, after a great darkness covered the earth, the creator god Viracocha emerged from the lake and brought light into the world. First came the sun. Then the moon and stars. Then the first humans who would eventually build civilization. And standing beside Lake Titicaca during sunrise, the story suddenly feels strangely understandable. Not because modern people literally believe gods emerged from the water, but because the environment genuinely feels like the kind of place where ancient people would imagine creation beginning. The Incas built ceremonies around that belief. Pilgrims crossed enormous distances through mountains to reach sacred islands within the lake. Priests performed rituals beside the water. Offerings of gold, food, and carved objects were placed near the shore for generations. The most sacred location became Isla del Sol, the island of the sun, where the first Inca rulers were believed to have emerged after the world was created. Even today, local traditions connected to the lake still survive quietly. Certain fishermen avoid speaking disrespectfully while crossing the water before sunrise because older generations believed the lake should never be mocked carelessly. Some families still leave small offerings before important journeys across the water. One guide explained that his grandfather refused to whistle while traveling across certain sections of the lake at night because local beliefs warned that disrespecting the water could bring violent storms. Not because the lake was evil. Because it was powerful. And perhaps that is why the legend survived so long. People kept experiencing moments there that felt emotionally impossible to forget. One traveler later described watching lightning storms move silently through distant mountains while the lake reflected flashes of light across the water like mirrors. Another visitor admitted she became emotional during sunrise without fully understanding why, because the landscape felt ancient in a way modern life rarely allows people to experience anymore. Then archaeologists found something beneath the lake that made those ancient stories even harder to dismiss completely. Because the underwater ruins were only the beginning. The first thing visitors notice when stepping onto the floating islands is movement beneath their feet. Not waves. The ground itself. Scattered across Lake Titicaca are floating islands built entirely from reeds by the Uros people. For centuries, the Uros constructed entire communities using layers of tatora reeds harvested directly from the lake. The lower layers slowly decay beneath the surface, so fresh reeds must constantly be added to keep the islands alive. And somehow, entire families still live there today. Homes float on the lake. Watchtowers float on the lake. Boats made from reeds drift across the water while mountains surround the horizon in every direction. One traveler later admitted the strangest part was not seeing the islands from a distance. It was feeling the reeds move gently beneath every step while children ran across the floating pathways completely unbothered. Another visitor described hearing the islands late at night after tourist boats disappeared. The lake became dark and silent while reeds creaked softly beneath the water and cold wind moved across the floating surfaces. He said it felt less like visiting a tourist attraction and more like briefly entering another world. The islands were originally created for survival. Long ago, mobility protected the Uros people from danger. Entire sections of the islands could be relocated across the lake when necessary. Families adapted to the environment instead of trying to control it. Over generations, the lake became more than geography. It became identity, protection, survival, and spiritual respect all at once. One local explained that children growing up on the islands learn the sounds of the lake almost instinctively. They recognize approaching weather through the movement of wind and water. Older generations pass down knowledge about storms, currents, and seasonal changes because survival depended on understanding the lake emotionally as much as physically. And perhaps this is why the local legends feel so alive there even today. Some traditions describe Lake Titicaca almost like a living presence. Not supernatural in a horror sense. Not evil. Simply powerful enough to deserve humility. One fisherman explained that storms can appear frighteningly fast across the lake. Calm water can suddenly become violent beneath black clouds moving through the mountains. Another guide described mornings where the lake became so perfectly still that boats appeared suspended in the sky itself because the reflections erased the horizon completely. Then came another strange discovery. Divers searching beneath sections of the lake floor began finding evidence suggesting entire ceremonial structures still remained underwater. And suddenly, the floating islands no longer felt like the only impossible thing about Lake Titicaca. At first, archaeologists expected underwater discoveries in Lake Titicaca to be small. Fragments of pottery. Ceremonial objects. Maybe traces of ancient settlements. They did not expect an underwater world. Divers eventually discovered long stone walls, carved terraces, ceremonial objects, platforms, and structures that appeared connected to ancient temple complexes beneath the surface of the lake. Some ruins rested nearly 100 feet underwater. One diver later described descending through the freezing darkness before his flashlight revealed something impossible looking beneath the lake floor. A staircase. Stone steps disappearing deeper into the water. Then came walls. Then carved platforms. Then long stone formations arranged too precisely to be natural. He admitted the experience felt emotionally overwhelming because the ruins looked less like random debris and more like the remains of a forgotten civilization frozen beneath the lake. Another archaeologist explained that the discoveries completely changed how researchers viewed the region historically. Ancient civilizations around Lake Titicaca clearly considered the lake spiritually important long before modern archaeology existed. Ceremonial objects had been intentionally placed beneath the water. Rituals occurred there repeatedly across generations. And perhaps the strangest part is how naturally the discoveries connect with the old legends. Because civilizations across the world created stories about submerged worlds and sacred floods. Atlantis became the most famous example. But Lake Titicaca contains something even more fascinating. Real underwater ruins beneath a lake ancient people already believed was connected to the beginning of civilization itself. One local guide later described crossing the lake just before sunrise after a storm passed through the mountains overnight. Clouds drifted low across the water while the surface became completely still beneath the morning light. Several tourists stopped speaking entirely. Not because they were afraid. Because the place felt impossibly old. Another traveler explained that standing beside the lake made modern life suddenly feel very small. Phones, schedules, traffic, noise, all of it seemed strangely distant compared to the age and silence surrounding the water. He admitted the feeling stayed with him long after leaving the Andes. And maybe that explains why Lake Titicaca continues affecting people so deeply today. Not because anyone can scientifically prove every ancient legend. But because the lake still creates the same emotional reaction ancient civilizations experienced thousands of years ago. Wonder. The kind that makes the world suddenly feel larger, older, and more mysterious than everyday life. And somewhere beneath those waters, parts of that ancient world may still remain hidden. There are places in the world where legends never completely disappear. Places where ancient belief, human experience, and real discoveries continue blending together across generations. Lake Titicaca is one of those places. If you enjoy legendary places, ancient mysteries, fascinating cultures, and real-world stories that make the world feel larger and more magical, subscribe to Tilt and Chill. Because some places are more than destinations. They become part of human imagination forever.